my wife and I would see and identify our differences as a bad thing. And we would often be in this place where we were kind of like jockeying for position or who was right. And the reality of it is neither one of us care about being right. We care about getting it right.
Still out in Arizona. And this is going to be another great episode of the Big Fish Cares podcast. I'm with a friend, I'm with a fellow speaker, coach, and probably, I would say, no, definitely, I'm going to say the most authentic human being I've ever had the pleasure of knowing and speaking with. You're right up there with the best. Brian Bogert.
Wow.
Welcome to the Big Fish.
Dude, you gave me chills like down my spine. The most authentic human being. Like, I don't even know how to receive that. Honestly, I'm receiving it because it's meaningful, but that's a huge honor for me to hear from you.
And the reason I can say that is because I see the way you show up for other people and how you're able to help them like notch one more closer on the authentic scale. And I know authentic's a buzzword. I try not to, I say that word. Is there another word? Do you have cinnamon? Cinnamon. Do we have cinnamon for it? Do you have synonyms for the word?
I love cinnamon, though. Yeah, I do love cinnamon. Yeah. No, I don't. And it, again, because authenticity is what it is, right? It is a buzzword. And I think that's what's challenging for me is when there are words that actually really carry power and meaning that get diluted because of how they're utilized in our world. And it's a buzzword that has, I think, diluted the impact of what being authentic really means.
So I watched that video, the little intro video you have on yourself about your childhood story, the news, flashing up like a minute and a half. Like, I want to see if we can put that in here because I think that would give the audience a really cool, just quick backstory. I feel like where it almost all started for you. All of us can, have that 7-year-old memory, right? And I think your accident happened when you were 7, right? And I guess just briefly, I don't want to get into it too long because that's not why we're here, but just tell everyone a little bit about that story because it's very impactful.
Yeah. So again, we were just talking about on your show how sometimes you and I can both have a tendency to just chunk through the story. So for the purposes of this, I'll do that. But yeah, my mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush to finish a home improvement project after we moved back to the States. And I was the first one in the car. I've always had an excitement and a vigor for life. So it wasn't a surprise to my mom and brother that I was there. I wanted to get home and put that paintbrush to use. They were a few feet behind me. And this was back in the days before there was key fobs. So I had to wait for my mom to literally reach her hand in the purse, grab the keys, stick it in the door, turn it so they could go on all their way. And as I was waiting for her to do that, a truck pulled up in front of the store and the driver and the little passenger got out. The passenger all the way to the right felt the truck moving backwards after they got out. So he did what anyone else would do, and he scooted over his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up on the steering wheel, and before you know it, he was catapulting 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at me with no time to react. Went up over the median, went up with a tree in the median, hit our car, knocks me over, runs over me diagonally, tearing my spleen and leaving a tire track scar on my stomach, and then continuing on to completely sever my left arm from my body. It's been reattached, obviously, but as all of this happened, my mom, the next thing she heard was my brother saying, "Mom, Brian's arm is over there." And as she looked up and glanced, she saw a trail of muscle leading to my arm that was cooking like hamburger on the asphalt, and my arm was 10 feet away. Now, I will say this because I have to always acknowledge, outside of my mom, the woman who saved my life, I was actually texting with her last week. Really cool story how that all came together. But there was a nurse that walked out of the store and saw the literal life and limb scenario in front of her and rushed immediately into action. Now, I've said for years that I'm forever indebted to her for her choice to do that. I didn't really understand the full power of that until I met her for the first time on the 30th anniversary a couple of years ago. And she had a friend with her that day. A friend that also had all the same training, all the same approaches, knowledge as a nurse, who turned her head and went on with her day. Now, I want to be really clear. I have no malintent towards this other. That was well within their right to do. But to honor the point is that in a singular moment, in a singular choice, it can have a ripple effect that'll impact hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people as a result of it. She came over and stopped the bleeding on the main wound and saved my life. That was the primary concern. And then she instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, and fill it with ice to get my detached limb on ice within minutes. It was a 115-degree day, August 10th, 1992. My arm was cooking, literally on the parking lot. Had it not gotten on icing minutes, I would just have a cleaned up stump today. And so if it wasn't for her, I either wouldn't be here with you or I would be here with you with a cleaned up stump. Like, that's just the reality of the situation.
Where do we go from here, folks? That was deep. Yeah, my audience just heard that for the first time. I mean, I've heard this story, and you've delivered a couple speeches that I'm not part of, and when you talk about it and you're able to kind of go through your message, I'll never forget just the way that you're able to tell that story with such like emotion and like description. Like even when you say like your arm was melting like on the asphalt, like cooking. I mean, and me being in Phoenix now, like I can understand like how that like is actually possible.
People can fry eggs on the asphalt here.
I feel like I could fry just like not even being on the asphalt, but like everyone's got like a traumatic story. A lot of people have traumatic stories. Some people don't have as traumatic, but like, and I talked about this in my EOS talk because I almost died of an overdose, right? And it's pretty traumatic for most people. But like you like one up, like that's a one up, like like that. And again, it's hard to. Some people are probably listening. It's like hard to relate. They never had that,
Yeah.
And so when they hear my story, when they hear your story, like does something that bad have to happen to me to like wake up?
Yeah.
But you didn't wake up right away.
No, I didn't.
So talk to me about the time from, coming out of the hospital to like having to, I'm sure challenges of its own, dealing with like an arm that like, it's kind of there, but it's not like, it's, you know what I mean? Like you're not, you can't lift the same amount of weight, right?
No, I mean, I can lift about a gallon of water, about 8 pounds.
I mean, it's
8 to 10 pounds.
It looks
it's functional.
It looks incredible. I mean, the fact that, modern medicine, I don't know. It's incredible that like you even have an arm that you can like use your hands, right? Like, but like, what was life like? Because I know you went through a lot of other pain that was probably more, what I want to call abstract, like that people didn't see. Like we can see that pain, right? When you tell that story, when the newscasters are on, like everyone can feel that. But like, what about the next 20, 30 years of pain?
Well, there's a lot of it. And I think to your point on like people struggling to be able to relate, right? What I'll do is ground this really quickly because what I know in all the years of telling my story is how unique it really is. I mean, not just having my arm torn off and reattached, but the fact that I can lift my kids above my head and I have functional use of it today. To your point, I mean, I was in the hospital with other people who had detached and reattached arms at the same time, who their arms are stiff, completely locked up. They have no utilization or they lost it because it didn't actually successfully remain. And so for me, I know how unique it is, but I also know how unique everyone's stories are. And what I learned really early was that it's mostly important about how we learn to pause to extract the lessons we can from our stories so we can become intentional in how we apply those moving forward. And that started and shifted for me because the very first thing I remember was feeling like I was in between worlds in the first 48 hours after the accident. Like I literally have this vivid memory of almost like looking down on my body and witnessing it. And at 7, still having this belief of why me? Like, why me? Poor me? Or like a victim, really. And then we started being surrounded by people in community that were all in the ICU with us. Parents coming up to us saying, we're so sorry. We're so sorry for what happened to you guys. Like, oh my gosh, it's so traumatic. Like, what can we do to help? And I get chills every time I tell this because it's real. Because then we come to find out that their kid's laying in the hospital bed next to me with a terminal illness and doesn't know if they're going to live another 30 days. I don't know at that moment whether or not my arm is going to be successfully reattached or if I'm ever going to have function of it. But my life was no longer in jeopardy. And so that was the moment that I started to realize that I was not going to get stuck by the things that have happened to me, but instead get moved by what I can do with them. And that's led down this path now where I believe that moved people move people. But to bring this into like reality in the very beginning stages, I came out of the hospital. My arm had to be 90 degrees and it had to be 90 degrees out from the body. So I would have a teddy bear in between my sling, holding my arm out. And I was always cute, right? And I've always been like loud. And there's always been like this energy that my daughter has it as well. It's like there's been a gravity to me for whatever reason in my life, always.
Do you think you were like that before the accident? I know it's hard to probably remember.
No, absolutely.
Says you're like
absolutely. So my 2nd grade teacher told my mom, actually it was my third grade teacher. She said, it was about the year after my accident. She literally looked at my mom and she's like, I think he had a near-death experience and he's like out on this vigor to like take over the world. And she goes, no, that's who Brian always has been. Right. So that was like one thing that was real, but I'm here and people are coming up and they're asking me like, what happened? They're expecting like the normal story as an 8-year-old to be like, well, I was racing my brother down the street on our bikes and I crashed or like whatever. Right. And I'd look him deadpan in the eye and I'd say, I was over by a truck and my left arm was torn off. 99% of the time, these following two things happened. After they picked up their jaw off the floor because they were in shock, they would pause and they'd turn to look at my parents for validation, which told me they didn't believe me. They didn't see me. They didn't understand me. My truth. And you're even sitting, you're like, yeah, we can see it now. They could see it then. But they didn't believe me because it was too audacious. It was too crazy. And how are you communicating about this so matter of fact? And so I started to believe that the world wasn't going to accept my own truth. And then the second thing those same people would do is they would start to view me through their lens of what they'd be capable of in my situation, immediately limiting me, telling me all the things I was and wasn't going to be able to do.
Give me an example.
Oh, man, Brian's never going to be able to ride a bike again. I mountain bike. I've road biked. I was training for an Ironman. Oh, Brian's never going to be able to water ski. I learned how to get out of the water with one arm. Oh, Brian's never going to be able to play sports. I played tennis at a professional level and I taught starting at age 15, right? Like now I'm telling you some of these things because that also drove me for a period because I was being told all these things I'd never be able to do. And I came from a place where everything was always easy for me coming into that state of my life. I was speaking full sentences at 18 months. My dad at 2.5, I asked him to take the training wheels off my little 12-inch bike. And he prepared me and told me, you're going to crash. You're going to like take off the training wheels. And I got on the bike and I rode it. And I was too short to actually put my feet down, even on a 12-inch bike, because I was only 2.5. So I would crash it. And I would get up at 2.5 and the little raspy voice would be like, didn't hurt. Right? Like that was always a big part of who I was. But what it drove in this next phase was I needed to prove what I was capable of. I didn't realize that I was chasing this for a long time because I was really proving it to myself, but I was also proving it to the outside world, right? Like, and I went into this state where I was told mindset and mental toughness are going to be the key.
Who told you that?
I don't know. I honestly don't know the narrative, right? I don't know where that came from, but it was what I was like just always assuming. You know, it's interesting. My brother went to therapy after witnessing all of this.
How long was he older?
14 months.
Okay.
You know, my mom and my brother saw things that I'll never know, but they never sent me to therapy because they thought I was okay. But my mindset was this: Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And I did. And I shattered expectations. And that served me really well until it didn't, which was about 20. And I know we'll get deeper into the story, but that was how I lived for those next 13 years. I mean, 5 years of intensive therapy. Like 20 surgeries over the course of the next 4 years and a few more that took place later, I largely became a patient instead of a kid. And I had to learn how to connect with peers, move through the world. And it forced me to grow up really quickly in ways that I also had a really difficult time connecting with peers for a very long time.
Because you're hanging out with doctors and nurses more often than you're probably hanging out with other 8 and 10.
I mean, I was up 3 days a week up at physical therapy, occupational therapy, 6 a.m. in the morning before school.
So what was it like with kids and friends and stuff like that? Did they look at you and feel sorry for you? Did anybody make fun of you?
Oh, yeah.
Like all of that? Like,
yeah.
I can only imagine kids are awful.
All of it.
And awesome at the same time. Like,
all of it. I would tell you that I didn't really start creating friendships that were independent of my story until like middle school. But elementary school, yeah, I got teased. I mean, we know the old term that we don't hear that often anymore, but I got called retarded, right? Like people thought that I, almost similar to even what you had talked about with your ADHD, that it's like, oh, well, I'm put in this class with learning disabilities. Like,
even though your story was so public.
Yeah.
And like on the news.
But it was legitimately, it's different. And anything that's different scares people.
I guess they didn't have social media back then.
And social media didn't exist. No, it wasn't the same, right?
So like even half the parents probably didn't like.
No, and so, but with the kids, it was like I was different, and like I sometimes in the first couple of years, I had an aide that would assist me for a period when I was in second grade. And in third grade, it was like, again, third, fourth, and fifth grade, I was in and out of surgeries too. So I'd come bundled up someday. I'd be wearing a splint another day as I'm trying to learn how to use my hand again. Like, it just was different, right? And my reality as a result of it was also different. But I wanted the same things all the other kids wanted, which was to be seen, understood, connected, have fun, have friends. But I was always put under this umbrella. I started to escape that a little bit in middle school. And then in high school, there was like a dramatic shift. But I would tell you that up until that age, like, yeah, it was mean and I got bullied and I often felt alone.
What was the relationship with your parents, and how did they handle having a disabled child? And like, how I feel like there's not a lot of resources for that. So like, you barely get prepared to have a regular kid. Mm-hmm. That's hard enough to have like, a perfect baby. Yeah. But then when your baby or your child has something that they're struggling with, it's very, physical in nature. Like you can see it, like ADHD, like, which you probably have, right? That's internal. They can't really see it. That's a whole nother world. But like, arm disability, like there's a lot more care that can go into that. What was the relationship like with your mom and dad, and how did they adjust and handle that? And what positive effects, negative effects did that have on your life?
Yeah. The first thing I always say is that I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for my parents. I'm loyal to a fault, and I always have to honor them because they are truly some of the strongest, most capable people I've ever met. Period. But there was also a lot of times that I was a patient, even with my parents. And that brings my mom a great deal of pain to hear that. But there were times that I just felt like I was a patient. Now, I want to also be really clear. I always felt loved. I always felt supported. I always felt encouraged. It wasn't that we avoided the word, but like the concept of being disabled was never even a thought.
Gotcha. That's good.
It was like, what can you do? I learned years later that, I used to get super frustrated with something as simple as trying to tie my shoes. And because though I don't have a lot of dexterity, even still today, I had even less then. And so the concept of like having to relearn how to tie shoes after I'd already done that, relearn how to do like button my pants because I was doing it with one hand for a long time. My parents realized that they could have taken one of two paths. They could have done everything for me, made my life really easy because I had gone through this trauma, or they can prepare me to be able to live a life independently. And so my parents would do things like, and again, this is what I learned about years later. My mom would force me to tie my own shoes, even though it could have taken her 10 seconds to do it. She'd watch me struggle for 5 minutes, figuring it out, getting upset, getting angry, frustrated, like really stuck in those moments. And here's the thing, like she'd be around the corner crying because she really just wanted to do it for me. Mm-hmm. I get chills when I say that because, again, like there's a little bit of an ancillary impact to every action we take. My parents always did the best they could. They always had amazing intent. They always loved me and wanted me to be supported. But there are also ancillary effects of like actions like that. I felt like, what, like, really? You're not going to just help me tie my shoe? Right? Like I struggled. One of the few things I struggle with still today is cutting steak or cutting meat because I don't have a tricep in my left arm. Right. And so I would literally be struggling to cut the meat. And today they don't even question if I'm like, could you just cut this for me? Like they will. Right. Like but then it was like they were trying to really see what I was going to be able to do. Mm. And so they never assumed that I couldn't do anything. They always assumed that I would find a way. Mm. And they typically would try to help me do that. My parents made a decision early because we saw this as well with other kids that were in and out of the hospital with me around the same time. Things like this tear families apart. And my parents went into it knowing that, right? They also ultimately divided and conquered in the ways that like their strengths were going to help support what I needed most. And my mom is an unbelievable caregiver. She always has been. She is one of the first people that will be there to cook, clean, help people change. Like, like there's no, she'll with her mom and dad, like change diapers and shower them and like not even think twice about like, that it's weird or awkward or there's privacy. Like she's just so normal in the human body. And so that was always something that she was able to help support me. But they also had to make me do things to be able to do things. Right. They were the ones that kind of created one of my very first concepts that we started teaching. Because though I was largely in a fog for those 3 to 4 to 5 years afterwards, I mean, and I don't even have a lot of recollection and memory of it anymore, other than the stories. They were not in a fog. They were intimately aware of the unceasing medical treatments, the years of physical therapy, the pain that I was constantly in. And they literally would embrace the pains necessary to ultimately strengthen and heal me, because the idea of seeing their son grow up without the use of his left arm was a source of great potential suffering for them. And so this concept of embracing pain to avoid suffering, whether it was intentional or not, was something that just got ingrained in my life and into everything that I do, which now fuels a lot of what we teach today, which is much more beyond that. Now, I know we only got to a certain place, but you asked, like, what are the other pains?
Well, that's why, that's the one that everyone can see. That's the one that's there. That's actually like my first question I actually have on my list was, you spoke about embracing pain to avoid suffering.
Yeah.
It's funny you just brought those exact words up. But I want to hear about another story that might be kind of in the shadows, something that people can more relate to, a personal experience that embracing that pain led to significant growth.
Yeah. There's a lot of my story today that's not in the shadows, because I do believe that the more I shine light on it, the more freedom it gives for me and for others. So I say that not to be cheeky or to be coy or to try to take it somewhere else. Like, I love to talk about things that I haven't talked about before. So I'm happy to do that. But what I would, where I would point to this is one of the most significant moments for me was in my marriage. And, I often talk about how I believed that this original accident was my origin story. Like, it was my transformation story. It was the thing that defined it all. But utilizing a lot of the ways that we speak today, it really was the story that created a lot of trash from my past that I pushed through and pushed down for years. I dealt with a deep amount of shame. I dealt with a deep amount of anger. And I mean, we're talking anger that I didn't even know was there, like, until a few years ago. I never identified as being an angry person. It was 32 years old that got me to realize that when I shut off physical pain, because it exceeded my ability to cope when I was 7, I shut off mental pain, emotional pain, and spiritual pain for 20 to 25 years and didn't even realize it. I'm living my life trying to connect with other people, trying to live and utilize these concepts of vulnerability and authenticity to do it. But the moment that I had to embrace the most amount of pain was the moment that my wife and I sat on our back patio, which was almost 3 years ago to the day, almost exactly as we're sitting here having this conversation. It was 10 months earlier that I had left my other business to get down this path of helping people really get to the core of who they are and live the lives they want. And my wife started to tell me that things I'd done, ways I'd shown up, and patterns, some of which still existed, had created a path that caused her to lose who she was, which was like a dagger to the heart for me. Like, my wife is my everything. I can't imagine a life without her. And so I was faced with a moment where I either needed to pause, listen, and be able to respond, or I could have reacted like I had in so many other situations where I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm not angry. I didn't do that. That's your problem. Right? Snapping off at my wife in ways that, like, really she never deserved, to bring it really clear into something that I know a lot of people can resonate with. Again, it was unconscious and it was hidden, and I've forgiven myself in lots of ways, but I'm still shocked at how much I didn't see. My wife would ask me something as simple as this: "Hey, honey, what are you doing with the kids this weekend?" But my shame and my anger filter would cause me to hear it this way: "Hey, honey, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father here recently, so what do you need to make up for it this weekend?" Then all of a sudden I feel like I need to defend that, because being a good husband and father is something that I care about deeply. And I certainly want others to feel that that's part of who I am. Right. And now all of a sudden I feel like I'm being challenged that I'm not a good husband and father. So what do? I rattle off the 10 things I've done in the last few days to show her I'm a good husband and father. Wasn't even what she was asking. So I had to embrace the pain of really doing the work that I teach so deeply today in an area that I was unconscious to even 3 years ago. Shame I've known about for about 15 years. Anger was just 3 years ago that I started to actually see it. I made a promise to my wife that day, though. I handed her my phone and I said, clear my calendar for the next 10 days. And I told her I'm going to do everything in my power to ensure the negative effects of anger don't affect our house as a result of me again. Knowing I'm human, knowing I was going to. But I'm really proud to say today, it happened maybe 3 or 4 times in the following 18 months. In the last 18, it's happened 0.
Like little outburst triggers or something like that.
Yeah, like nothing, right? I don't even get triggered in a lot of the ways. I really genuinely I didn't just mask or numb my anger. I got to the fucking sources of it and I faced it head on. And I made a commitment in my actions and my behaviors and how I would pause myself and slow myself down, realizing how much I was suppressing emotion, just allowing myself to actually feel it, because I believe if we don't feel, we don't heal. Right. And so this is what I had to tell her. So now today, I would tell you that though it's not a story that's in the dark, it's the one I'm probably most proud of as it relates to embracing the pain necessary to avoid suffering. Because now I say my wife and I have been together for 17 years. We hid from each other unconsciously for 14, and she's only felt emotionally safe with me for 24 to 36 months. My kids don't remember having an angry dad anymore. Right? Like you mentioned earlier that you want to live your life in a way to show people what's possible. I do as well. That's very much what I believe. I believe that I'm the man and the mirror. I'm the man in the example that I cast, and I'm the mirror in the reflection I cast back to people's trash from their past. But it's like I've had to go to those places, which is also what allows me to understand others in those same spaces.
Wow. That's I feel like that behind the scenes moment of you and your wife having that conversation out, I'd love to ask her, how hard was it for her? Did she just get to a breaking point to where she finally had to talk about it? And she'd been harboring this for a long time, and it just got to the point where she was just kind of done with it, or did she
that was really where we got both of us. Now, what was created 6 weeks before this was a moment that I will let her tell. I don't tell this part of the story because it's hers to tell. But there was, ironically, I'm big into numbers and patterns. March 6th of 2021 was the date that my son would have been the same age I was the day of my accident.
Yeah, okay.
And so for whatever reason, for 3 or 4 years, March 6th was this date that was significant to me. She and I happened to be on an overnight getaway with each other. And it was that date that we discovered the missing puzzle piece, which created the 6-week window where she had to go explore and do a few things. And we both were in a really painful, separated spot. But what it also created was the capacity, the freedom, and the confidence to finally stand in her truth and fully own it for what it was and be detached from perceived loss with each other. We had to be prepared, both of us, in that moment to recognize that we might not be married another 30 days from now. And if that's the course that it takes, that's the course it takes. But we had to get to that full level of detachment. She had to before she actually was able to communicate it in a way that I was able to receive it. And yeah, it was she was there. And it was I'm no longer going to put up with this. This is something that needs to immediately change. And that's how I received it.
What advice do you give to a couple that might be listening, either if it's the man or the woman, depending on the situation, how to have that conversation and how to create an action plan so then that way they can have some type of peace?
So I would tell you that it's slightly different for every couple, but I would suggest a couple of basic things. More often than not, my wife and I would see and identify our differences as a bad thing. And we would often be in this place where we were kind of jockeying for position or who was right. And the reality of it is neither one of us care about being right. We care about getting it right, but we didn't know how to do that with each other. And so there would be times that we would both be in reactionary states, or one of us would be leading, or one of us would pull each other out of a hole, but it always created this hierarchy versus we actually are on the same fucking team. We want the same things, but we weren't allowing ourselves to be open enough and vulnerable enough to really talk about the stuff that was going to keep us from living the life that we wanted. because we were afraid of the judgment, the criticism, the shame, and we both have our own patterns that unlocked it. And so I'm a big believer that the faster we can remove the shame and blame from a situation, the better. Because the second shame and blame exists, growth and opportunity go away. And so if it was approached from a shame and blame perspective, which it wasn't, she just was owning her truth. She didn't say, you did this to me, right? She talked about the patterns and the impact that it had on her. She took ownership for her own spot, and it was coming from a place of truth and owning that truth. And seeing the fact that my wife wasn't attacking me, but my wife was hurting, and she was hurting because of me. That's what centered it for me. Because had she come at me attacking me, guess what would have happened? Armor would have gone up, I would have reacted, and I wouldn't have been married 30 days from then. But I had to assume trust, because what do we have to do? We had to reestablish trust, and I was the one as the antagonist, the bigger energy, the one that was creating this divide, that was responsible for neutralizing and diffusing that energy. And so for any couple, if you feel trapped in your relationship, embrace the pain of the conversation that needs to be had to avoid the suffering of remaining in a loveless marriage or ultimately wanting to escape and not knowing how. Like it goes back even to that same philosophy. Had she not embraced the pain of that conversation, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yeah, it's tricky because I believe that there has to be there has to be a level of trust too, that, someone can say something and, you're not going to fight or flight, right? Like you're not going to just abandon, or you're not going to react. Right. And so I think it's like a dance, but obviously at that point, what you called it, she was speaking her truth. Maybe is that a synonym for her being authentic? Like that was finally her being authentic and she was just letting it go.
Yeah. And I wouldn't tell you that she was inauthentic before. No. And it wasn't that she'd not tried to bring this to me.
Level,
right. Exactly.
It was level,
100%.
Right? She was just like,
and so, but this was like her limit where it's like, look, like I no longer deserve this. I don't want to be treated this way. I'm not going to have a partnership that looks like this. I'm not going to be spoken to in this manner. I'm not going to, and the mama bear kicked in on her as well, because my kids were also receiving some of this. And again, I didn't verbally abuse them. I didn't abuse them, but
they're aware.
I have a big fucking energy.
Well, they're learning. I mean, they're young and they're sparks.
Yeah. And so, but again, it was one of those things where it was like, I had to remove my own shame and blame. I also had to remove my ego and anything that I needed to protect with my wife, because it was going to take me further away from what I wanted.
And at this point, because this was just 3 years ago, you still had this amazing career. Like you've been speaking your whole life pretty much. You're showing up for the world, right? And you're like this amazing human being, but behind the scenes, it's like you were almost like another person.
So up until the moment that I realized I was angry, yes, because I didn't understand it. I believed I was living in congruence with what I was intending the whole time. My actions I was unaware of, and I was unaware of the damage they were creating. Now, the second I became aware of it, and this is what I tell people even in our own language today, the trash from your past is not your fault. It just becomes your responsibility once you become aware of it or you start burying others in yours. Right? I was
take the trash out. I mean,
right.
Yeah, the trash is good. We all have trash.
I was very aware in that moment that I'm burying the three people I care about most when I'm trying to serve the rest of the world. And that's the reality. And so for me, I've lost my train of thought of where I was going with that. With the try. I don't know if I lost my train of thought. But you had asked a question about it. It was about my wife in that moment.
Well, like she became another higher level of her truth self, her authentic self. I know you talk about authenticity a lot.
I want to close the thought because I remember now where it was going. Okay. And you were like, yeah, so you're living your whole life this way. Yeah. And it was really funny. And I'm going to hold this back and not say who this was, but there was a couple of people in Ashley's life that were like, Brian is living a fake life, and what he's perpetuating and promoting to the world isn't happening in his own home.
That hurt. You heard that?
Yeah.
She told you that? Mm-hmm. She could have used that as a dagger, maybe. Like,
now
they know how to get to you. Women know
how to me, right? But the second that happened, I was like, and this is how I've always been. Like, once I'm aware of something, I don't hide it.
Mm-hmm.
So within days, I was talking about it publicly. In fact, it was like 3 days after Ashley and I had this conversation, we were set to speak to a marriage mastermind. It was the first time we'd ever spoken together. And it was 3 or 4 days after we realized that our marriage was on the brink and we were going to do everything we needed to save it.
And this thing was already scheduled. You guys were prepped.
So we literally were like, well, the only way to go into this thing is real. And like one of the very first statements that we said is it's like, we're in this position where you guys are asking us to come in and speak around areas of expertise. And I just want to say that like we are as imperfect as every person who ever has positioned that they're perfect. And we just talked about it. I said 3 days ago, we had this conversation. This is where we are right now. This is what our plan is at the current moment. But 6 months from now, it could look completely different. And we just owned the fuck out of it. But it was unbelievably empowering for the room.
Good timing. I mean, very powerful. And they knew that the Bogerts were going to show up for that. And the universe like made the Bogerts go through that. So then that room could be even more inspired, in fact.
But the second I became aware of it, I had to be publicly congruent.
That's who you are. That's how you show up. I mean, you help other people because of your authenticity. And as you learn who you are, and you've had seems like a mission to be able to help other people with their authenticity. How do you help people become more authentic? Like what's you have like this skill or this gift? It's like you just like did it just come natural? Like have you learned how to do it? Is it just through your own journey that you're just able to see it and so you just speak into it because you're just not afraid? Tell us a little bit about because when you speak, man, it's powerful.
Thank you. I think I have some natural gifts and some natural intuition that has also been shut off for large periods in my life. It's been honed and conditioned in many other periods of my life. And I've only started to acknowledge it and fully own it as a gift in probably the last 18 to 24 months. I've always known that I was similar to you, different. And not just because of my arm. It just made that publicly and externally available.
Yeah, you're like double different.
But I've always been different, right? And I viewed different as bad in lots of cases. So I would shut it off. I mean, I remember it, I don't know, probably 12, 13, 14, and 15. There would be times that I would like look into somebody's eyes and I would do even similar to what I do today, where it's like a reflection on the person. Here's what I see. Here's what's happening, or here's what's going to happen in the next few months. And like without fail, it would like land. And then I started to feel like people would disconnect from it and it would separate me. So I hid that part of myself because even though I was doing it from a place of benefit, I didn't know how to deliver it, curate it, understand it. But I've been studying people, human behavior, and human connection for like 20 to 25 years.
On purpose? Or like
both. By pure observation and study, consciously and unconsciously, but also through reading and understanding like the science behind it as well. That has only supported what I've seen. Today, I would tell you that it's a highly conditioned gift. I leverage the power of pattern recognition largely. I understand how to read people. I understand like all of the micro expressions, even though I don't have to study them or like reflect. Here's the biggest difference though, that's freed me to actually do what I do effectively. I used to be worried about two things, both protecting the person I was speaking to, as well as needing to be perfect in how I was going to say it, which led me down this path of feeling like I had a bad memory. I wasn't able to access the knowledge when I needed it. And what I found today is that my gift works in absolute highest power, highest frequency, highest vibration when I am in complete surrender and I allow wisdom to flow through me versus having to access knowledge. When I get into a channeling mode and what I see in certain people, like my cadence even kicks up. And it's like, because those words aren't necessarily mine anymore, but I do have a really unique ability to see people and see where and how they're in pain, to see where and how they're protecting themselves. And then because of everything I've been through, I meet people where they are and I can see their power and potential through all of that. And so for me, it's about creating a safe and protected space first. Because the only way to meet someone where they are is if they themselves feel safe and protected. Me, big energy, delivered through armor, is confusing as fuck for people. They don't know what to do with it. They don't trust it. Right? And that's how I lived most of my life. Good intent, but delivered through armor, created all this diluted impact of what I was really wanting to do. And so for me, the only way I can create those safe and protected spaces is if I myself have nothing to defend. And so for me, the more free that I get, the more I can be neutral and objective. I mean, literally one of the first things I say when I start doing one-to-one work with somebody is there's nothing you can say to me that's going to shock me or that will be received as anything other than objectivity and non-judgment. Because at the end of the day, I don't care about what you've done, what has happened to you. What I care about is how has it impacted you and what thoughts and beliefs have been created as a result of that we need to unwind and start to create new patterns through. So for me, it's always going to start through a place of objectivity and non-judgment. And then I can allow my abilities to come to the surface.
Man, you say that so well.
I think it's like the first time I've ever answered that question, though.
Yeah, so. I know. It's like Corey, like when he like answers that, it's almost like it just comes out so.
But that's surrender as well.
It flows, and I love that about you.
It's surrender as well, though. Like literally in this conversation, I'm here and I'm present. And I'm hearing you. I'm thinking. I'm feeling. But I'm also right here, right? And so when I can surrender to that, that's what I've also realized. I have an ability to have wisdom flow through me, even if I've never thought about something before, when I'm in surrender. But I also don't have a problem saying when I don't know something.
You speak a lot about activating limitless potential. Mm-hmm. How can people break through those self-imposed limitations and tap into their full potential?
So it comes really through a couple of core concepts that we now teach. And I'm not going to go through each one of them from a pillar standpoint, but we have a methodology that we call waste to wealth. And it's 5 pillars guaranteed for any individual or organization to identify and remove the waste they don't know exists within. I can understand how people could have operated for 20, 30, 40 years unconscious to things because I did it. I almost lost everything and everyone I care about because of me.
Self-sabotage.
100%. Right. And so because I lived largely unconsciously, I also have zero judgment for other people's actions, particularly if they're not conscious to the impact of those actions. For me, it's always about raising awareness first and doing awareness in a way that's not just helping people become more aware of all the ways they should be judging themselves, but actually understanding what to do with it. I think ownership is a really big component. Ownership to me is looking at a whole variety of things, but it's putting ourselves in a place where we remove the shame and blame of self while also assuming fault and responsibility for everything in our lives. Because then it's not about pointing fingers to someone else if it's your own truth and your own perspective. I do believe that if we don't feel, we don't heal. It fits into our unpack pillar. There's been science that's now promoted and supported this. There's 40,000 cells in the heart. They're called sensory neurite. They're brain-like cells that carry cellular memory. And they've shown that if you go through the intellectual process of unpacking the patterns of your past alone and you don't embody the associated emotions to connect that 18 inches from your head to your heart, that those patterns are going to continue to repeat because those 40,000 cells don't heal. Right? There are elements of learning over time as well. And I'm going to skip around a little bit, but one of our pillars is called move. It's how do these emotions move through you? How do they move through the world so that you can move through them? Shame moves through my body 5 or 6 different ways. Anger moves through my body 6 different ways that I'm aware of. And I understand the physiological patterns.
Is that everyone or just you?
Me.
So,
because I've done the work. Okay. It's not the same for everyone else.
Like I might have 4 or 8. Like
you could.
Gotcha.
But shame is the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing because it presents itself as about 50 other emotions. So until you understand how it actually moves in your body, how do you ever get ahead of it? Right. And so that's the first step is understanding, okay, physiologically, how are these things showing up and understanding the patterns that exist because it's cellular memory being activated that's causing you to react in moments that have nothing to do with what's right in front of you. It's when your wife looks at you funny and it really reminds you of how your mom looked at you when you loaded the dishwasher incorrectly when you were 14.
Dude, you just hit the nail
on the head. I know.
That happens to me all the time. And I have to tell Brittany, like, yeah, it's almost like I feel like in some of those moments where like I didn't feel seen by my mom. And again, my mom did her best. I love my mom to death. But you know, we all have moments with our parents. It's like you remember, like there's like this flash of a trigger, like or something that Brittany will do that'll remind me of my mom that I didn't like.
And all of a sudden you feel like shit.
Oh yeah. And then
and then you can react.
And then the high D inside of me, the Mr. Dominant activator was like, I ain't dealing with it, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I'm 42 years old.
So that's the reality though, is that 99% of the times we're not reacting to anything to do with what's in front of us. It's cellular memory that's being activated in 4 different ways: physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, because there's cellular memory in all 4 areas, right? So if you don't understand how these move through your body, how could you ever start to understand what I call trigger mapping, which is understanding what triggers you in the world? I have over 50 shame triggers that I'm aware of and over 60 anger triggers that I'm aware of. Why is that important though? Because when
60 that you actually listed out.
Yeah.
It's part of the work.
Yeah. Because if I don't have knowledge and understanding of that, then the next time my doorbell rings and my 2 little chihuahuas start yapping and I get on sensory overload and I'm ready to yell and react and tell them to shut the fuck up, right? If I can't separate the fact that that's an actual anger trigger for me that sends my energy up here, what happens when I haven't identified that, neutralized it, or moved through it within minutes and moments, and my kids come and jump in my lap because they want to play with dad? What energy are they going to get? Not my open heart. They're going to get the energy, the resentment, the tension that's coming from a trigger that had nothing to do with it.
There's people out there right now listening to your story and listening to how you speak, and they're like, man, I can never be like that. I know it. How does someone, let's talk about the ones that actually want to like have that awareness, because there's a lot of us they're listening right now. They're like, I don't even know if I want that. Like, I'm happy. I'm just happy. Like, nothing's wrong with me. I'm like, they're just. Let's talk about the ones that want that awareness. What's some steps that they can take to become more aware without their wife having to come into the room and sit them down and talk to them, without a drug overdose, without getting their arm ripped off, without losing $10 million and going bankrupt? What is something that they can a human that can do just to become more?
Every single human knows what it feels like to be triggered, even if they don't understand the patterns that support it. I have yet to meet a human that's like, hey, do you know what it feels like to be triggered? And they're like, no, I don't. Every human knows what that feels like, right? Whether it's an anger trigger, a sadness trigger, a grief trigger, it doesn't matter. Like, we know, right? Yeah. And then the secondary question behind that is, well, how quickly do you know? Almost everybody's like, oh, instantly. But the majority of people operate from a place of reaction versus response. So even though intellectually and emotionally they're aware that it's happening, they don't do anything to break the pattern. So the very first thing that I would say, and this is like really low-hanging fruit for anybody, is just pause in the moment of trigger and take a breath and ask yourself one question. Is what I'm reacting to right now due to what's right in front of me, or the trash from my past? Here's a little secret: 99% of the time, it's the trash from the past. But what does that allow me to do? I can flip open my lead in real time. So now my wife could say something to me and I can feel the moment of trigger. But because I'm also not defending anything and I'm clear and I'm stepping into ownership and awareness, what can I do now? I can pause and say, this could be a similar situation with you and Brittany. Hey, honey, I just got triggered by what you just said or by the way you just looked at me, which tells me that I didn't hear you correctly or I'm reacting to something that I don't know. Could you please restate what you just said? And I'm going to try to listen through a more neutral lens. And if I can't do that, can we just pause this conversation and revisit it so that we don't create damage? Like the next time Brittany looks at you and you feel that.
Just say that to your wife, Jorge. like that's like, I know that you can get there.
But you right now, right? Yeah. The next time Brittany looks at you when you've loaded the dishwasher,
therapist right? supposed to do.
You can pause and literally say, hey, I realized that I just got extremely triggered and I don't think it has anything to do with you, Brittany. So I'm going to try to move through this in this moment. Can you just have a little grace for me and understanding that like this is probably connected to some deeper work that I'm still doing?
Oh, man.
It's just stepping into ownership. Because then what happens? She's feeling and reading your energy and emotion, whether you think she is or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, then she assumes it's about her.
Every fucking time.
Well, everyone does, right?
But that's the point. So then what have you just done? You've just given a gift by neutralizing your own truth, which is, man, I'm triggered and overwhelmed right now. I know it has nothing to do with you in front of me, and I love you, so I'm trying to communicate that to you so that you don't think it's about you.
Yeah, if we all did that more with people, even in our business relationship.
Everything. So I teach this, and I work with people.
How did you learn that? Like, did you have therapists, mentors, coaches? Like, how did you learn it, or is it all just your own life experience?
It's been all of it. Yes, I've had therapists, mentors, coaches. I've invested over $600,000 in coaching for myself in the last 12 years. But here's the reality. It's not one person or one thing. It's a culmination of all of it.
Collective, yeah.
Right? And then me having to also create modalities and belief systems because there wasn't a pathway for me to do this without what I've created. I didn't have a healthy model for doing this in anything I'd read or studied or been taught, which is why the work we do with people can be so transformational, because though it's universal truth, it's not taught in a way that's as accessible as the way that we teach it. But it's like, that is really what's going to be required. I mean, again, I've got people that I work with that are running huge businesses, are completely financially independent. But the thing they want most is to be connected at home with their wife and their kids, and they have no fucking clue how to do that.
Well, their outer world is they've created that shell of success in that outer world, and they're trying to figure out that inner world peace, that love at home.
And so that's what I help people walk down the path.
Because it gets extreme, especially with entrepreneurs.
Dude, it's crazy
super extreme. I want to shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
And like, because you help so many people just in your messaging, the way you speak life into them. Where are you struggling at? Like, what do you need help with?
I am still learning to receive at a big level. I'm learning every day. I'm flexing my asking for help muscle as much as I possibly can. I'm even redefining what receiving means. You know, what's interesting is in universal truth, to give is to receive, if we allow the flow of energy to take place. I have given, and I've not allowed myself to receive. You know, one of my mentors 3 or 4 years ago, I asked him point blank, what's one of my biggest blind spots? And he said, Brian, you're really shitty at receiving. I didn't know this at that time. And I was like, what do you mean? I don't even know what receiving meant at that moment to me. He said, Brian, he said, I've seen you run through brick walls for other people. I've seen you make calls. I've seen you ask for anything, for anyone, to anyone, if you believe it's going to impact other people. The second you believe it's got personal benefit, you don't ask. And he said, but Brian, the way you live your life, everything you receive is ultimately going to impact everybody that you're going to give, because that's how you live your life. Now, I had not been in a place where I believed that. Again, I believed and I learned to receive love, validation, and connection through performance, which meant to me that it was always about what I did for others. You and I were talking about this. I mean, I would be the person that literally would walk into a restaurant for a group of 15 at an expensive steakhouse, and the waitress would have my credit card before I was even sat. And no one else knew what was going to happen. And I did it because it was, one, what I believed was there to help support, promote, and take care of all the people that were there. But it was also like, I wanted secretly, and I didn't have the words for it then, and I didn't know this consciously, but I also like wanted secretly for them to be like grateful and like acknowledge and be like, oh, thank you, like Brian, like that's so kind of you, because it was like acknowledgement. Right. And so I would race to pick up the check. And often I wasn't even the person that had the most money in the room. Right. And so my wife and I have this philosophy on giving until it hurts, which means we've given even when we don't have it. But the other side of that is I have also closed off so many opportunities for me to receive, because I was convinced that on my climb to success, I needed to be on my hands and my knees, and I needed to have scraped open knees and hands for it to be meaningful. But if I look at the number of escalators and stairs, or elevators, escalators, and stairs that I walked or crawled right by, they would have helped me skip 10 steps because somebody could have just inserted me there if I'd been open to receiving. Like, I don't regret anything because everything has led to purpose and meaning, but that is where I'm really working, because I need all the fucking help I can get. We want to impact over 1 billion lives. I'm still in many circles one of the best kept secrets. When people experience what I do, like there are people who've witnessed what I do and have experienced it and still can't put words to it. Right? There are people who have witnessed me in multiple relationships for years and then come to my retreat and they're like, man, I thought I knew. And then I was with you for 4 days in your retreat and holy shit, I didn't even know. Right? And it's like, I know my ability to help people, but I also was so guarded. I've been taken advantage of. I've been financially and emotionally extorted. And it's taken me a long time to be able to trust that there aren't strings attached and the rug isn't going to be pulled out from under me. And if it is, I'm still going to be okay. And that's been a lot of my blocks to receiving. But I'm every day asking for help because I don't get in front of enough people. I don't get in front of enough rooms to perpetuate what I want in my life for impact that I know I'm capable of doing. But opening those doors are sometimes the hardest parts.
We do that check thing too, because I don't think that we know how to, if somebody else would pick it up, there's like that awkwardness of like, I mean, I've seen people do it though. No, I got it. No, I got it. Oh, no, I got it. It's like, that's like, especially when there's like lots of energy, you know? And yeah, that's something I'm working on for sure, the receiving.
Now I go out to lunch and if somebody offers to pay, immediately I just say, thank you. I fully receive that. Because I'm still conditioning
you gotta
myself.
Practice, yeah.
I have to practice. I'm still getting reps.
Gary Vee talks to me about a lot of stuff. Like you just gotta practice it. Practice.
It's life.
Practice.
It's life. But once you get enough reps,
how do you know when? How do you know when the imbalance? If we're so used to giving, and we can practice this receiving, how do you then find the balance of giving and receiving?
I don't think there's a balance. I think there's a flow. And I don't think that there's always direct lines. I think there's a lot of dotted lines.
So how do you decide the next time when you pick up the check at lunch versus like you're going to sit and receive? Like do you decide that before you even go to lunch? Do you decide that halfway through the lunch? Do you decide when the waitress is bringing the card over? Just that silly example.
I always go in and am prepared to pay.
Well, I understand that, but like, when do you make the conscious decision? Like, how? Like, are you reacting to the vibe? Are you like ahead of time thinking?
No, I think as it relates to the check situation, it's probably really real time.
Never you can relate to this one.
I think as it relates to the check situation, it's probably more often just real time.
Just feeling it out,
right? And
flipping the coin like underneath the table, saying like, oh, I want to receive and see how that feels.
But I also don't feel the need to compete. So like, you know, if the check sits there for a second, I'm going to go ahead and reach for it. And if it ends up in my hand, I'm going to pay for it. If somebody reaches first or they jump in line and they're like, no, I got this.
You're not going to like,
I don't try to overtake. And I used to be that guy that was like, fuck no, you're not paying.
Oh yeah.
Right.
That was almost better than slipping the credit card ahead of time.
Right.
Because then it almost makes you feel
right.
Better. Like, oh, I got 100%. Like I got to prove like, yeah.
But I think for me, it's also the evolving definition of what receiving is. Right. I think the area that I am still opening myself to receive, I would tell you, is even more on the business front now than it's ever been. And what I mean by that is like, I receive so much from my wife and my kids, from my friends, from the work that I do, from my clients, from my communities. Like I get so much feedback that is in alignment with what I like ultimately want and desire. I largely am living the life that I've always wanted to live today for the very first time in the last 18 to 24 months. I was in daily physical pain for nearly 31 years. I'm a year and about 45 days with zero physical pain.
Really?
For the first time in my adult life. I consider that receiving. Right? I'm receiving at a very big level right now in ways that I wouldn't have looked at that historically, because the only thing that I ever used to tie from a receiving standpoint was around money. It was always tied to money. There was always a value and a worth that was connected to it. And receiving to me is it's energetic now more than anything.
Well, that kind of brings me to my closing question. And I'm glad you kind of said the money thing. So what do you want to be known for? What do you want your legacy to be? And how will you measure that impact?
I want to be known for compressing time for people, to allow them to see what's possible in short windows in terms of who they can step into and finally have the permission to be the person they've always desired. I want to be known for the person who actually helped heal a huge portion of our society. And on our mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as we can, is to reduce the level of suffering that exists on this planet, largely of which I believe exists internal. I lived a lot of my life suffering. I know how dark, how desperate, how lonely, how isolating, how disconnected it can be. I also know what it's like on the other side of that, which is to be filled with joy, freedom, and fulfillment. I believe that I can create a pathway to allow people in this world to actually be who they want, live the lives that they want. And I think that I have a unique set of skill sets and experiences that put me in a really unique position to do so in the state of the world that we're in today, when we're starving for human connection. Because what do I really teach? How to connect with yourself so you can better connect with others. Because it's those areas of protection that disconnect us, and I know how to remove them for people. I don't remember all the other questions. You said,
how are you going to measure that impact? Are you going to count the billion? Are you going to count the money in your bank account? I mean, I know you're not, but like, I'm just like,
I measure the impact on a moment by moment basis, because I can't measure a lot that's immeasurable. See, of our billion lives impacted, it's not going to be Brian Bogert's name behind it. I'll be a big movement behind it, but it's going to be through a collective impact by really moving as many people as I can. And it goes back to what I said earlier in the show, that move people move people. If I move you in any way that makes you better, right? And we didn't talk about this, and I'm not trying to take any credit for this, but like, I know I also helped you with some clarity before you went and delivered this talk, right? Like, we spent time together, even thinking about the structure, what are the lessons that you want, and pulling this together. You just went and impacted 2,200 lives with your story. You did it. But I had a little influence in helping you move those people.
Definitely.
That's a part of my impact, right? And I don't take credit for that. That was Benny Fisher.
And I'm actually still getting emails. And it's been 2 weeks. I'm still getting emails from people that are telling me their story and then telling me that they're going to go tell someone else their story.
Yeah.
So, and like,
because it moves. That's my point. So move people. And so I'm trying to move as many as I can. Because yes, the over 1 billion lives is the target, because that's 20%, just under 20% of the world, which is, I think, a critical enough mass that we actually can see some change in my lifetime. So how am I going to measure this moment by moment?
I actually don't even think you need that many to like actually set the world at another level of.
I don't think we need that many. I think we need that many for it to be sustainable.
Sustainable is relative depending on cost and time,
which is the truth. So for me, it's a moment by moment thing, and it's about how am I living my life in congruence with who I am and what I believe, and how do I do that literally with each breath, with each step, with each moment that passes by. Because I do have a healthy relationship with mortality, and I recognize that, like, yes, that's the vision, yes, that's the goal. I might not wake up tomorrow. I don't plan to not wake up tomorrow. But like, all I can do is measure it based on how I live today.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I would have asked you?
No. Yes, but I wouldn't necessarily say it as much as of a question. I think there's a lot of people that will look and listen to me speak about these things, and to your point already, be like, oh, I can never do that, or I don't want to do that. The thing I want to be like really, really clear on is that where I've gotten to was because of what I needed to do to survive. Like, I was a practitioner of pain, and I wore that as a badge of honor for a long time, how much I could deal with, how much I could put up with. And here's the reality. For me, all of this is about spending less and less and less time in that low frequency negative energy and emotion that used to consume my life. Years I lived in it. Then it was months, then it was weeks, then it was days. Now it's minutes and moments, which means that I have exponential capacity to be able to handle a whole variety of things that I couldn't have in prior periods of my life. I can be more present because I'm not carrying an unnecessary weight. But what I also want to be really clear on is I'm no sage on a stage. I'm human. I get triggered all the fucking time. I get triggered a hell of a lot less than I used to. But what I want people to understand is that I don't sit here and preach. And I also don't want to sit here and actually just teach. I want to live my life congruent to what I believe, but I want everybody to do the same thing for themselves. So it's not about living like Brian or getting to some place that's here. At the end of the day, I think each person needs to define like what they want for them, and then find a way to give themselves permission to live that way. And so for me, all I'm trying to do is to center and ground in the fact that it's like, yeah, I can talk around these topics and I know them inside and out, and I can help people do it. But I also don't sit here from a pedestal and say, you all should figure all this out. I'm on the journey still myself. And so there is no final destination. There's constant evolution of self. And I think the more that we can remove the hierarchies that exist in this world, and the more we can walk alongside each other, the more we actually all get what we want.
Thanks so much for being here. This was a great episode. I know my audience got a lot of value out of this. I got a lot of value. So even if they don't, like, if nobody else listened to this, like, just the present conversation that we just had was amazing. Thank you for that.
Thank you, my friend.
If you guys want more information on Brian Bogert, you can go to brianbogert.com. If you have comments, you got questions for Brian, if you put them down, we'll make sure Brian answers those. And I think the best way that you are the best kept secret, like you are, I mean, I'm around speakers, like, because I'm doing a lot of conferences and events. I'll never forget that. It's even the Zoom talk that you did, like we weren't even in person. And I'm like, dude, if you can move like that through a computer screen, like you in person, so we do not need to keep you as the best kept secret in the world.
I need all the help I can get to get in front of as many people as possible.
Yeah. And so if you guys know anyone, I'm being serious, that can use Brian's message, whether it's on Zoom or preferably in a live audience, because I believe that's where the most impact can happen. I saw it happen with me in my life and my story at the EOS conference. Get a hold of Brian, make it happen, and have a great day. This has been a really amazing episode, probably one of the best episodes I've ever done.
Thank you.
Yeah, stay tuned to another edition of the Big Fish Cares podcast.